Ladies and gentlemen, good morning. Oh no, this is going to be a long morning if we can't do better than that. Good morning. That's excellent. That's the Mile High spirit. My name is Doug Tisdale. I am delighted to serve as your chairman of the board for the Regional Transportation District here in Denver, Colorado. And this is such an exciting opportunity for all of us. I want to say, on behalf of the entire Board of Directors, we welcome you to our Transportation Transformation Summit. A couple of points. First, we're going to be bringing in some other chairs. I'm delighted to say that we are SRO, so that's terrific, but we will be bringing in some more chairs, so please bear with us on that. And then speaking of the board, I would like to acknowledge the board members who are here with us. And we have Director Paul Solano is here. Please stand up and hold your applause. Thank you for thinking of that before I said it. Director Kate Williams is here, and Director Peggy Catlin is over there. And then we also have with us what I guess I can call Director Designate or Director Elect, because they're running unopposed in their districts, Vince Buzek and Lynn Geisinger. Now you can applaud. Thank you. You know, we're currently witnessing. Oh, and is Larry here? I'm sorry, I missed it. Thank you for saying that. I should have said his name. And Larry Hoy. He'll get his separate applause. Any other directors I missed? And yes, I know there are candidates in the room, but I'm sorry, we're acknowledging directors and director designate or director elect. We are currently witnessing here in our region some of the most fundamental disruptions to urban mobility since the introduction of the automobile. New mobility services, things like microtransit and dockless bicycles and scooters and new service delivery companies and autonomous vehicles, these things seem to arrive annually now, if not monthly. Which of these disruptions will be complementary to RTD's purpose in serving 3 million Denver residents in a 2,400 square mile area, and which will be conflicting? Earlier this year, the RTD board identified transportation transformation as an RTD strategic priority for 2019 to address future transportation needs and methods. Our agency, which is recognized nationally for innovation in service delivery and major capital construction, intends to maintain that reputation as we transform from a transit agency to a mobility integrator. And that's what we're here today to talk about, among other things. Now, our plans for next year include alternative service delivery approaches, focused bus service improvements, including bus rapid transit, transit first and last mile opportunities and solutions, and completion of unfunded corridors, and the Transportation Transformation Comprehensive Plan. That's something we're calling the T2 Comp Plan, because we love acronyms in the transportation industry, as you all know. The T2 Comp Plan is an ambitious 2-year study that is intended to define RTD's future in these quickly changing times. These are all part of our innovative approach to lead the transformation and integration of mobility as a service across our entire region. RTD soon will be what I personally envision for us, and that's the MTAA USA. That's the most technologically advanced agency in the United States of America. That's what we are doing. Ladies and gentlemen, it is with great pleasure that I welcome you to our Transportation Transformation Summit. I know it will be a good program for you this morning, and I am delighted to serve as the chairman of the board for this vital agency. Thank you. Now it is my distinct privilege to introduce to you the man who makes the buses and the trains and the accessorides go. Ladies and gentlemen, please give it up for Mr. Dave Genova, our general manager.
Well, good morning. All right. Thank you, Chair Tisdale. It's always great to be introduced by Chair Tisdale. So thanks for that gracious introduction. Thank all of you for joining us today as we embark on the discussion of transportation transformation from public transit agency to mobility integrator. I know that the chair recognized our board members here, but I really want to recognize them again and thank them for their work and their service. You know, it's really a hard job to be an RTD board member. There are so many competing priorities and difficult decisions to make, and I really just want to thank you for your commitment in your hard work serving our community. I also want to thank the RTD staff, and I know that if I say RTD staff stand up, my fear is that most of the room's going to stand. But I would like them to stand because they're important people for all of you to know. So as you know, you're working and working through all of these conversations and engaged with us, that you know all these folks. So could the RTD staff just please stand up and if you would all just recognize them. So memorize their faces. They're your go-to people with your questions, your challenges, your ideas, your concerns. And I also want to thank our great RTD events team for coordinating this activity and this event this morning. There's tons of work that goes into these things, as many of you know, so thank you to our events team. And also we have, as some of you know, we stood up a mobility working group a number of months ago to kind of engage us in this dialogue, to kind of help us shape the conversation. And actually they helped us inform and shape the agenda today, and some of them you'll meet later in the breakout session, so I want to thank that group. In 2015, I said in a public forum, imagine a great transit city. And today we have one. We have commuter rail, light rail, buses, paratransit, and microtransit, and a recent $5.6 billion Fast Tracks transit infrastructure investment, all combined to provide over 100 million trips a year, safely and reliably. But I also have a sense of urgency as we look ahead to what I call the transportation transformation. There's heightened demand for the immediate, new technology, new options, increased congestion, increased trip times on our roads. So this comes with a great temptation, and that temptation is to quickly fill the perceived gaps and react to the latest new thing. And that reaction may include responding without fully identifying the problem or the solution. The result could contribute to the problem or contribute to congestion instead of providing relief. As the regional transportation provider in the Denver metro area, RTD is uniquely positioned to lead the regional mobility strategy through collaboration with our local and regional partners, and that is why you are here today. We want to engage all of you in this dialogue as we step out into this transportation transformation and talk about the regional mobility strategy for the entire Denver metro area. Some of the things we'll do today is we'll talk about RTD's vision in this area, and through your input, determine how we can work collaboratively to address our common goal. So before we move on, you all saw as you came in that we're going to use Slido today. And so hopefully you've already logged into Slido. If you haven't, pick up your phones now, please, and log into Slido. And the information is up on the screen, and it's also at the brochures on your table. And we will get logged in to www.slido.com, and then the code is hashtag capital T, 2 capital S, Summit. And the hashtag's already in the, I believe, in the Slido, so you don't have to enter that. Everyone logged in and ready to go? Everybody ready? Or do we need more time? Everybody's good? Okay, and our first question is queued up. This is an important mobility quiz for this group. How did you get to this event today? And hopefully everyone will respond as God intended on public transit. All right. Let's see how the results are coming in. We're up to 21 respondents. It's going 22, 25. Multimodal leading the way. "43 responses." And we keep going. So I think it's, oh wow, car just took over. I don't know about that. I have to admit, I came by car because I came really early and I got to run to another meeting right after this, and I will be in a car. But you know, I do want to say the other day I was meeting with Doug Rex at Dr. Cog and with Mike Lewis at CDOT. We had a breakfast meeting, and I carpooled on the way to the meeting, and then Doug Rex and I took B-Cycle to get to our respective offices. So that was a good day as far as being multimodal and using a variety of things. So, you know, we can kind of see, I don't know if this is going to change much, but 33% so far by car. Next is rail, multimode, bike, bus, a few walkers, and a few others. So I think, you know, we can see that we still have a lot of work to do in getting people into multimodal mindsets and to getting them on transit and some other things. So let's continue. So imagine a world where you can arrange trips for you and your family with or without a credit card or a bank account using a combination of car sharing, scooters or bicycles, buses and trains, ride-hailing companies, microtransit, and parking, or even maybe no parking. How about that? And all available on one app that bundles your trip and cost, tells you how long it will take, and when you can leave, and when you'll arrive. This is one role of RTD as a mobility integrator, providing personalized options for customers, and we plan to play a major role. RTD has established a reputation for innovation, and we fully intend to maintain and build on that reputation with the transportation transformation. Let's talk just a little bit about what's available now. So we're all familiar, I think, with the current environment of things we have. Transportation network companies, ride-sharing partnerships, bike shares, car sharing. We have microtransit through RTD Call and Ride and other private providers. We had the onslaught of the dockless mobility just in the last few months, and so we're going to hear one of our panelists talk more about that and the challenges with standing that up. We have automated robo-taxis and self-driving shuttles, all working around in the current environment around mobility. RTD is working on many things in this area, and I want to just mention a few things. We're having conversations with partners throughout the U.S. and even some international. Just last week, we met with one of our consultants, HNTB, who brought in Germany's Dutch Bahn, and they presented to us a single planning and payment app across multiple modes that is in place in Germany now and working well. So we were excited to see that. I think that, you know, that's where we all want to get. I think we're getting closer and closer and closer. And I want to just mention that RTD has 4 initiatives right now that we're very close to announcing. And they include partnerships with ride-hailing, combining mobile ticketing with ride-hailing on one platform, an autonomous vehicle demonstration in the transit environment, and advancing our existing microtransit call and ride service to the next level. So I just want to say a few words on mobility on demand and microtransit. They are not new. We have been doing somewhat on-demand microtransit for decades, very similar to what many agencies are announcing as microtransit pilot projects today. So many of you are familiar with RTD's Call and Ride program that we operate in 21 different areas throughout the entire Denver metro area. We're in the process of advancing that program, and in fact, just Tuesday night, I informed the RTD board that we would be providing a comprehensive update next month on the future of Call and Ride. You're seeing a sneak peek here this morning. FlexRide, a new name, expanded capabilities, and a technology app layover. So stay tuned as we continue to develop this and roll this program out and improve that already great service that we have in Call and Ride. So as we have this conversation, we have some challenges and we have questions that we have to answer. And I think the biggest one is what is going to be sustainable. So we're seeing all kinds of different pilots springing up. We're seeing lots of different investment into all kinds of different things. But what is going to be able to really work to help us solve the problems that we face? And is it going to be sustainable, meaning financially sustainable, meaning sustainable in terms of operations and maintenance, and sustainable in continuing to meet our solutions? What kinds of things are going to contribute to the solutions and what are going to just contribute to congestion? Because we don't want to rush out, put things in place, try to fill in gaps, and just increase the problem and increase congestion. And then we have some barriers, and many of you know that maybe work in the same area as we do at RTD. We have all these federal requirements and guidelines that we have to follow. So we have all these questions around accessibility as we roll out new kinds of mobility options. And I categorize those into several different areas. The first one is physical. So people that are in mobility devices and have other kinds of disabilities. Everything that we roll out from an RTD perspective needs to be accessible, or there needs to be a parallel physically accessible service right there that can serve that patron. And then we have barriers with technology. Not everyone has a smartphone yet. Most people do. Not everyone has banking. Not everyone has credit card. So these are things that we have to work through in addition to the physical accessibility. And then affordability. As we roll out additional options, how do they compare to transit pricing and other types of things that are available for people? So these are really, I think, a lot of the challenges and barriers and questions that are forefront for all of us at RTD as we're working through this conversation. And let's just mention ridership for a bit. I think everybody in this room knows that across the nation, we have a little bit of a downward trend in ridership in transit. And I'm going to break that down in a moment. But you can see in this graph shows you the national trend over time on that orange line. And, is this trend going to continue? Is it going to continue to drop as this graph is looking like? Or is it going to repair and come back up? Because you can see there's been ups and downs over history. But let's break it down a little bit and talk what's happening. So we know on the national level that commuter rail, light rail, and metros are typically increasing in ridership, and fixed route bus is decreasing. And we're seeing the same thing here at RTD. So if we look at our year-to-date ridership from January, we see our commuter rail is up 10.6% year-to-date over 2017. And that's without opening anything new in 2017 and without really building on any more capacity. Light rail is up 4.6% to date, and fixed bus route is down 3.8%. So there's been a lot of discussion about why is bus service dropping. There's probably about a half a dozen to a dozen different variables. There's been some studies, some TRB things. But I think a couple things to key on is, one is the accessibility to the automobile has never been what it is today. We have outstanding economy across the U.S. We have historically low levels of unemployment. There's a negative person available for every job that is out there. So all these things combine to make the car very accessible to households. And we find that if a household does not have a car, they're going to take probably 200 annual transit trips. They get one car, that drops down to about 10 to 15. They get two cars in a household, and it drops below 10. So this is, I think, a key factor that is driving bus ridership. And another one that I really want to point out is congestion. So congestion is increasing trip time, not only for automobiles, but it's increasing congestion for all of our fixed route buses that are out there, unless they're in dedicated transit lanes and things like that. So important things to consider as we continue to move through this conversation. And we want to be, RTD, our vision is to lead this regional mobility strategy. We want to implement a lighthouse model, working with our communities, engaging all of you, and working forward with this strategy and building it for the entire region. And what we're doing is really very similar to what's happening on the National View. Here's a quote from Paul Skatelis. He's the president and CEO of the American Public Transportation Association. So all transit agencies, we're all trying to do this same thing. And we're hoping that with our work, with all of you, that we're going to be able to do it really, really well. So our vision behind this is that, our network is the backbone. We have an incredible transit backbone. What you see on the screen is just our rail network with our bus rapid transit line that goes up to Boulder. It's an incredibly spread out, diverse hub and spoke network. When you put the bus grid on it, we have an incredible network established out there already. So we're uniquely positioned to maximize these investments and be the mobility integrator for Denver. RTD is the common denominator in this as we serve all the counties, as you can see our geographic spread. And the future of mobility depends on our ability to collaborate and work together. Our chair mentioned that we have a board of directors strategic priority for 2019, and that is addressing future transportation needs and methods. So we have about 5 strategic priorities for 2019. This is they're all important, but this is a very big one, and we will be working through this. Chair Tisdale mentioned that we're going to be doing a comprehensive operational analysis and system optimization. That's not a very glamorous name. We're working on coming up with something really catchy for what we're going to call this program and this plan. We'll be looking at alternative service delivery. We'll be focusing on bus improvements, first and final mile, count-based fare, and completing unfunded corridors to the best of our ability. We have lots of conversations with private sector partners about all kinds of different things. We've been having them for years. In 2017, I was really trying to formalize those conversations so we could get more things off the ground. But instead of just going out with an RFP on trying to just guess or tell the private sector what we wanted and what they could do, we put out a request for information. It was broadly responded to, and it really started to create a framework for dialogue on what the private sector is interested in, what they can do. But things have changed so much, and just since this went out at the end of the year, that there's things that need to be refreshed. But this gave us some initiative to put together our regional mobility working group. A few of you have been helping us work on that from local jurisdictions and TMAs, and you can see them represented. Our plan is to continue to engage that group, to expand that group as we exchange, facilitate, define, convene, explore, and pursue things that we can do. I also want to mention something that's on a parallel path that we're highly engaged in is Mobility Choice Blueprint. So we're in partnership with CDOT, DRCOG, RTD, Denver Metro Chamber, and the private sector on the Mobility Choice Blueprint. It's about a 1-year transportation study. We're about 3/4 of the way into that. The Mobility Choice Board is going to start to be seeing some of the draft recommendations and things that are going to be coming out of the blueprint, and hopefully we will have that blueprint by the end of the year. And it's a collaborative effort. There'll be pilot projects, and we're identifying potential to see what we can deliver there. So before I introduce our second speaker, our next speaker, we're going to do another Slido. So here it is, up on the screen. So pick up your phones. Hopefully you stayed logged in. And what should the public sector's role be in the new era of mobility? So we're going to ask questions today, and this is part of the engagement that we want from you. Your ideas, your thoughts. How do you see RTD working with you to address the needs that you have in your local communities, as well as the bigger regional questions? So we're getting a lot of responses in. We see that major regulation and partnerships ensuring equity among public and private mobility options is leading the way. Second option being moderate regulation and limited partnerships, and then the third is limited. And we can see with over 70 respondents that the majority is that RTD should be in a major role in this effort, and so I'm glad to see that. and we'll continue to capture this information as we move on, but the major is still coming in, polling very well. So thank you for that, for your participation there. And now it's my pleasure to introduce our next speaker. And our next speaker is Colin Murphy with us today. And he is from the Shared Use Mobility Center. It's a national nonprofit that is integrally involved in researching and developing shared mobility solutions throughout the U.S. He's the Director of Research and Development for SUMC, and he's here to provide a perspective on what is happening nationally with transit and mobility and where RTD fits into that picture. And if you want more information on Colin or all our speakers today, they're in the little speakers handout that we provided to you earlier today. So please join me in welcoming Colin. Colin, thank you very much.
Thanks for. Thanks very much. There we go. Thanks very much, General Manager Genova, and to Chair Tisdale for getting us started this morning. As Dave said, I'm Colin Murphy from the Shared Use Mobility Center. We are a national nonprofit. We work sort of at the intersection of public transit and then shared mobility, all these new modes that are coming online. And what we are trying to see and trying to work towards is a multimodal transportation system that works for all, where basically you can get wherever you need to go without having to own your own car. We really think that transit is the center and the backbone of any system like that. We do research. We've done a number of TCRP studies about how new mobility is interacting with public transit. We're looking at some other ways things are going around the world. And then we provide technical assistance all over the country. We're working in about 25 cities right now with the FTA's MOD sandbox cities. We're doing some new pilots that's funded by the FTA as well. And what we're trying to do is kind of extract the lessons and the best practices from these and get them out to the general public. So before I get into my piece, we're going to have yet another Slido because we're very interactive here today. And so this one is kind of gets to the heart of what I'll be talking about. And the question is, what do you feel are the biggest risks to the future of public transit? And this one is different than the others. This one is open-ended, so it's going to be you can type in your responses. You can vote for other ones. Funding, there's a big one. Congestion. Okay, Uber and Lyft, that's an important one. Funding still coming up front and center. Autonomous vehicles, whether they're going to be shared, whether they're going to be electric, whether they're going to be just a fleet of millions of autonomous individuals going around. Okay, so it seems like the big ones are coming up. Maybe it's not here. I'm not seeing just the ridership itself, sort of the generational change in the way people think about and use public transit. Okay, so I think we can move back. And so today I'm going to talk about, I gave you a little bit about ourselves. I'm going to try to put Denver kind of in perspective with some of its peers nationally, both in an urban context and then in terms of the transportation picture here. And I'm going to talk about some of what we're learning from some of the new mobility pilots that are going on around the country, including in the MOD sandbox, but also outside of it. And then at the end, I'll talk about how the agency role could be evolving and some of the risks there. And then at the end, we'll get the Slido out again for questions and answers. So first, where's Denver sort of population-wise? Among the mid-sized metros, so 1 to 5 million, it's about number 10, so middle of that pack. Although in terms of growth rate, it's a little higher. It's the seventh fastest growing metro over about the last 7 or 8 years since the last census. Austin, of course, is far ahead of anybody else. It's grown by about a quarter in that time. But what we're seeing is a lot of Sunbelt cities, a lot of southern cities and southwestern cities are really where the growth is. We're finally getting some information on kind of the national picture of how people are using ride sourcing in particular. So they did the National Household Travel Survey for the first time in the Uber and Lyft era, happened last year. And this was really interesting to me. This is looking at the proportion of your metro population that has used ride sourcing. So, and Denver is near the top of that. It's number 6 with it, and about a fifth of the metro population has used ride sourcing within the last 30 days at the time of that survey. San Francisco, of course, was at the top of that one, and this is among all metros. This is not just the population peers. In terms of transit investment, you guys are really near the top of the pack. This is transit capital investment per capita, and among the size peers, and only Seattle outweighs Denver. And then this is sort of an approach that we took to kind of put together how both public transit investment is going and how support for and investment in new mobility, shared mobility is going on. So the vertical axis is policies, modes, and partnerships in shared mobility, and the left to right axis is the level of public transit investment, diversity of services, investment in dedicated guideway modes, and supportive policies. And as you can see, Denver is sort of really out towards the edge of that one. So I think that speaks well to what is going on and the sort of level of dedication here to a diverse mix of both the backbone of public transit and then the newer modes. So the MOD Sandbox, as many of you probably know, was a federal grant program from the FTA that funded funded 12 cities to have to explore new ways of working with private providers. The way the program worked was the agency showed up with identified a private partner that they put into the grant proposal, and then applied this to the FTA. So they had the partner identified to begin with. There wasn't any sort of procurement. They're really trying to figure out new ways of contracting, new ways of establishing partnerships, and seeing where the stumbling blocks might be, both on the federal policy side and in federal grant making, but also just in these partnerships in general. So these have been underway since 2016. We're just now starting to get some of them on the ground, and so we're starting to see results from a number of them. And the biggest things that are coming out on the starting with the difficulties and the challenges are the real. It's pretty tough to work with tech startups and to sort of align the way public agencies work with some of the newer tech-based mobility companies, and I'm especially talking about TNCs. So that's transportation network companies, Uber and Lyft. But we're seeing in these projects that the real stumbling blocks, especially, come around data sharing, getting data back from the private companies, and around wheelchair accessible vehicles. we hear a lot of the time from the TNCs that they're worried about the privacy of their customers, and B, about their business secrets, and that's sort of the reason that is cited for not wanting to share even a fairly minimal amount of data back with the agencies they're working with. So every one of the MOD Sandbox projects that was working on that ran into that issue, and it's the same with projects outside the sandbox as well. The other big significant piece here is really because of the way the big TNCs are set up, with a contractor employee base who bring their own vehicles to the picture. They don't really have a very good way of ensuring that there are wheelchair accessible vehicles in their own fleets. And so almost all of these projects have had to figure out some kind of solution that goes beyond the TNCs in order to bring wheelchair accessible vehicles into the service. Another thing we're seeing is sort of a real contrast between the way, and that should say contracting styles and paces, but we're seeing a real contrast between the way public agencies and the newer tech companies work and sort of the paces that they do their contracting at. When the original partnership agreements were forged at the beginning of the sandbox, you had frontline people from the TNCs who were very excited to make this happen. In a lot of cases, they made sort of handshake deals, and the application went in, it got accepted, it got funded, and then when it comes time to really work out an actual service agreement and an actual contract, and the corporate office and the lawyers get involved, it's been a lot tougher to make those what was originally talked about happen. So, and I don't know if that has to do with the structure of these companies in particular, if it has to do with, sort of the frontline partnership policy people are not empowered enough at this point, but that has been a stumbling block in a number of places. I think this also has to do with the fact that the private companies are evolving before our eyes, and so in the 6, 8, 12 months that it takes to get from the handshake and the original project conception to actually getting it down on paper, their entire strategy and business model may have evolved, and they're interested in doing something different than they were when it originally was conceived. Another issue we're seeing is especially the big TNCs do not want to be on the same screen as their competitor. So Uber and Lyft, just as part of their basic terms of service, just never want to have their service availability shown next to one another, and they especially don't want to see their prices next to one another. And we're also seeing that they really have a preference for offering their off-the-shelf solutions rather than working with agencies to develop sort of custom solutions around service delivery, around how the apps are going to work. And I think that might have to do with, they've just done sort of a cost-benefit analysis on what it costs them to do custom software development or work out a new API or do something that is different from their basic app, and have decided that that's really, for the number of new riders they're going to get, it's probably not something that's worth it for them. So what we have seen from this is that there are also newer market entrants who are eager to make things happen, especially if it's a project in a market where they're not already working. So in a number of these cases, there were projects that started out with Uber and Lyft that ended up with Via, actually. And I think part of that was Via was not operating in these markets already. They saw this as a big opportunity to build up, from a sort of in a small, concentrated way, rather than Uber and Lyft, who are already in these markets, totally saturating the entire metros, it was not a big advantage for them to add a new small, relatively small project. So some of the things that we are seeing on the ground and produced and real from these projects so far, there are a couple of mobility as a service platforms and integrated apps that are being built. TriMet in Portland and VTrans, which is the Vermont Department of Transportation, are getting all of their services onto one platform, and they're working on including not just fixed route, but also demand responsive, microtransit, the private agencies, the private services, the shared mobility services, and in the future they're aiming towards getting non-emergency medical, transportation, social services, and all of those other providers that are, everybody who's running buses around, trying to get it into one place and get one vehicle supply that everybody can draw from, ideally. So this is a picture of the Vermont trip planner, and there is about a 300-mile trip across the state that I planned from the Burlington Airport to the town of Lyndonville, and it's done on a mix of different agencies' services. It'll take me 7.5 hours and cost me $7. So and this is all based on their development of GTF Flex, which is an extension of GTFS to include demand responsive services. So that's up and running. I don't know if you can see it, but it's just at plan.govermont.org if you want to play with some itineraries yourself. TriMet is developing, working with the Open Trip Planner, which I know you guys have at the core of your trip planner, to do a multimodal trip planner that gets bikes, bike share, the TNCs, and car share as well, and that also is up and running. And they're also putting the code out. The code base from that is out. They have a GitHub repository where anybody can see where they're at and use that code for themselves. And so I think the big things that are coming out of these projects are realizing that, especially if you're putting lots of modes on a trip planner, that if you're putting auto-based modes like TNCs and car sharing alongside public transit as a possibility, how do you prioritize what you want to prioritize? How do you sort of drive people towards public transit rather than some of these other modes? Or is that a thing you want to do? And if so, how do you do that through programming? How do you do that through sort of incentives? And so that gets to the question of what the appropriate agency role is. Outside the sandbox, we're starting to see some of the earliest pilots that were working with TNCs and actually directly subsidizing them with transit agency dollars. PSTA, which is the Pinellas Suncoast Transportation Agency, that's in suburban Tampa, so to the west of Tampa. We're the first people out of the gate with to pay TNCs with transit agency money. So they had a zone-based TNC system that would take you from wherever you were to a bus stop within that zone. That got about 13,000 rides by about 500 people. There were 500 unique users. It was very heavily used by just a few people. 30% of the rides were done by 10 people. Which actually, if you look at it, it really is more about the project was not very heavily used because those people were using it about once a day, which is not like super crazy. And in a new phase they've that was recently launched, they dealt with some of the kind of design issues and are moving forward with that, and they're making the subsidy for the wheelchair accessible vehicles, they've upped that, so they're really dealing with that. And PSTA has another program where they give people who are income qualified, who have a second or third shift job that they can't get to or can't get home from because the buses are stop running at 8 p.m. So for these folks who have the discounted bus pass, they can also get 25 free TNC rides a month, and that has been a pretty successful program. And that's funded by more social services grants than transportation grants. So that's done actually about 3 times as many rides. Another one more on the microtransit end of things, which frankly kind of pales compared to a lot of what you guys have been doing here with Call and Ride, but they're calling it microtransit, so it's a bigger deal. But in Austin, they repurposed a number of their paratransit cutaways, for a microtransit service, replacing a pretty low-use circulator in a sprawly suburban area of Austin. So it's a general public demand responsive system. It uses agency vehicles, agency drivers, and then VIA is the technology behind it. And so it was a year-long pilot. And it did pretty well. I mean, in terms of operating costs, it was about $10 to $15 per passenger trip was what it ended up costing them, compared to north of $50 for paratransit rides. About a third of the riders were people who would have been using ADA paratransit, and so in cost terms, it did all right. It was not breaking any records in terms of productivity. It was doing about 4 passengers per vehicle revenue hour, which is kind of middle of the road for demand responsive, but it's an interesting approach so people, the word is getting out from Denver. But honestly, the Call and Ride that you guys have been doing for the past several years is, even though it's not called microtransit, I guess yet, maybe a rebranding is in the works, but that's been a very, you guys are really learning a lot about that and leading the way on that. So what I think we're starting to learn from a lot of these is where these mobility on demand solutions make more sense, and that the TNC based stuff is best in the lowest density areas where it's just impossible to run buses on any kind of schedule that's useful to folks. That microtransit sort of fills this middle ground where you've got at least times or places where you've got a decent amount of demand and trip generation, but there's something else that would make fixed route difficult to work there. But even the best of the microtransit solutions that we've seen around the country seem to top out around 7 passengers per hour. So that really seems to be a natural limit of how productive those things can get. Car share, I think I can skip over in the interest of time, but I think the biggest thing lately is micromobility, all the dockless stuff that really just has exploded in the last 12 months. You guys, the scooters showed up here this week, and I think that was really not on anybody's radar. If you saw Bird scooters in Santa Monica a year ago, it kind of seemed like a joke, but I think people are realizing the more they get on them and the more they use these things, and I'm also talking about the dockless bikes and the e-bikes, that having more people on sort of human-sized, fairly slow, much smaller than a car type transportation is something that works really well in core cities. It's opening up a whole new set of issues around right-of-way and around parking and around where the right place on the sidewalk or in the street is for these faster than a person modes, but slower than a car modes. But I think that's a real great advancement. So starting to tie up here, what could the transit agency look like in 10 years? I think that sort of the model that we would be hoping, that a lot of folks are hoping to get towards, is one that connects across modes, connects across private and public, and creates a place under one roof where all of these services are at least coordinated, if not licensed and regulated and planned. There's going to have to be a lot more careful thought and coordination, particularly around right-of-way access, around how people are using sidewalks, how people are using streets, what's going on with parking, where TNCs can pick up and drop off people. The autonomous vehicles, it's important to be thinking about now. I think the massive influx of autonomous is a little bit further away than people might believe. I think we're going to see demonstrations and examples of it in a lot of places, but I think that the widespread adoption that would lead to like the Jetsons future or the nightmare dystopia is that's a lot further off. That takes a lot more sort of gearing up of the production and adoption of these things that is more of a generational sort of timeline. But I think the things that agencies should be thinking about are these key flashpoints around data. There's going to be huge amounts of data being produced by all of these new private services. Who is going to be the custodian of that? How is it going to get from place to place? Who is going to do the analysis? Is this something that public transit agencies have the A, capacity, and B, interest in warehousing, just terabytes of data being generated every day? And so is one possible solution to that working with other institutions or agencies around in sort of these regional consortiums to deal with and analyze some of this stuff, and is there a way to derive mutual benefit from that? And a lot of these questions really have to do with data, with standards, with starting to write the use of newer standards into procurement so that you're not 5 years into your procurement or into your contract before you have to, and then have to sort of change direction with your vendor. So start thinking now about what's going to need to happen. And then we've seen preemption pushes from the TNCs, so that's where local control over regulation of the services gets taken up to the state level. That happened with TNCs a couple years ago, nearly everywhere in the country. I think there's going to be another wave of this around autonomous vehicles and connected vehicles, and it's important for agencies to think about that, think about what their position should be, and how they're going to want to, establish a policy and kind of get ahead, especially on that AV. And then finally, talking about some of the risks that we see with the explosion of MOD. Or with working, especially with a large portion of your transportation system based on these private providers. So what happens if the venture capital evaporates? Nobody knows. This is the thing that totally keeps me up at night. We don't know the real price of an Uber or Lyft ride at all because it's being subsidized by venture capital and sort of on the backs of the drivers. So if you are several years into a partnership or a project that people are depending on, that is going to be moving a lot of people around in TNCs, and then something happens and the venture capital disappears and the real price has to get recognized of these services. What does that do to a system that you're making a bet on TNCs in? Also, if you're depending on the TNCs or other new services to move a lot of people around your metro, what are you not investing in? What transit investments are foregone, especially if a lot of this is looking forward to sort of the shared autonomous vehicles are going to solve a lot of our problems and get everybody where they need to go, so we don't need to invest in transit, which is a kind of a increasingly common sentiment that I'm seeing. So if that doesn't, if it's 30 years before that happens, what have you not invested in that in the last 10, 20, 30 years, and where does that leave your city? The nimbleness of these companies really cuts both ways. So Dallas, I think, is a good example of this. They had no bike share at all 2 years ago. By the middle of this year, they were, with the arrival of all the dockless companies, they were all of a sudden the bike share capital of North America. There was more than 20,000 bike share bikes there for a while. And that just happened overnight. These bikes were there. There was a great new system. And then very soon after that, several of those providers pulled out. So the same things that make them able to show up in your town with just container loads of bicycles and put them on the streets also means that they can, are you cutting me off? Also means that they can get out of there. Okay. Just as quickly. So that was pretty much the end anyway. I think we're going back to Slido now for the Q&A, right? Which I can't see yet, but okay. So wow, we're here already. Okay. So we're on to Q&A. I guess these are the queued up, preloaded ones. So anyway, just to tie up, I think there are big questions that we need to think about in betting too heavily on either the really privately led future or one where the public sector is leading things. So now getting into questions and answers is going to be an entirely Slido-based process here today. And this first one is, will Uber and Lyft be the Betamax and VHS of our time, or the Blockbusters, or eclipsed by a streaming transit? So I guess that's about whether, to me, that makes me think about whether shared autonomous vehicles are going to be something that, whether Uber and Lyft are going to be this thing that is sort of a flash in the pan, or if something new is going to come along. I think it's going to depend on how long their investors are willing to kind of prop them up without them making a profit. I think it's a really big bet that a lot of people are making right now, that they'll be able to survive through this period when they still have human drivers, and make it to a time when there are no human drivers behind the wheel of most of the Uber and Lyft cars, and they will be, and then their revenue model really changes and they can really start making money. I think some of the newer market entrants are looking more at how do we get more people into vehicles, how do we work more closely with cities and transit agencies, and at least in terms of partnerships, I think there's going to be more interest flowing to those guys. How does Uber and Lyft's desire to not be on the same screen limit the ability to develop multimodal trip planners? That's a good question. So I'm not sure, Dave mentioned the German technology that you're looking at. The city of Vienna developed their own MOS application, sort of a back-end framework that they then turned around and launched a company and are now selling to other agencies to use. And they started from having a stronger regulatory framework where they just could require that any provider who wanted to be a part of this had to play on their application. But I think it makes it tougher to really show people the full variety of what's out there. On the other hand, Uber and Lyft are not that different. So, the services they provide are not fundamentally different in some way. So if really it's just, here's your taxi, here's your TNC, here's your car share, here's your bike share, it's not that the user is going to miss out on one particular mode just because one of the TNCs is not on there. Okay, what should private sector agencies be looking for in partnerships with private companies? I think from the start, I think getting the terms down on paper as soon as possible, so that you know what you're getting into, and it's not, so you're not experiencing what a lot of the MOD sandbox cities and others are finding, where it's just taking a really long time to mold these partnerships into what was originally conceived. So making sure you understand what your private partners' just basic limitations are, what are the things that are not movable for them, and what are they truly able to do or not able to do, and then what is negotiable, I think all of that starts with really understanding what your goals are as an agency and for a particular project, and beginning from there rather than starting with the idea of wanting a partnership and then figuring out what can happen within it. I want to be mindful of time. Are we getting close? 5 minutes, okay. What do agencies need to invest most to prepare for the new role? I think a lot of it is just more on the human side of things, building like what's happening in this room today, getting all of the important people in one room, all of the different agencies who touch on these things, convened regularly, talking to one another and understanding what each other are doing, and I think really that the human side of it and the sort of organizational and the coalition building almost is going to be as important as any kind of technological investment or policy move. Whether that gets formalized into something at the MPO level or elsewhere sort of depends. Okay, what standards should I'm going to go to that standards one. What standards should the public sector be including in contracts with these companies? At a minimum, I think at least the statement that they need to abide by, or they need to build to standards. These things are still being worked out. They aren't really there yet. GTFS Flex, which the Vermont project is using, is still kind of nascent and evolving, but there's also the GBFS, which is the bike share one, which all the bike share companies are getting together to kind of, or the bike share, both the providers and local agencies who work with them are getting together to have a standard for data exchange. But I think it's more important to sort of, at this point, just say we, kind of reserve the right to have them work on standards in the future. How do we address the fact that while TNCs provide individual convenience, they also increase congestion that affects us all? That's one of the huge questions, and that, New York City is taking one approach to it, where finally they're saying, okay, kind of the Wild West days are over. They're putting a hard limit on the number of vehicles, that can be out there. But that in a way serves two purposes. It makes a given vehicle more likely to be used more efficiently by more people for a longer time. And so, one car is being shared among several drivers and used around the clock. And so that's getting to more of like what the taxi industry looked like. But I think it's going to come down to regulation, which is going to be tough because a lot of these things have been preempted away from cities. But as these problems become more clear, I think the need for a solution will be. And then I think we're just about done here, and I can hand it back to Dave. Okay. Better to invest in their own app, or I'm going to take this one last one. Better to invest in their own app or partner with existing apps or platforms. I think if U.S. Agencies could figure out a way to create these alternative revenue streams that some of the Europeans have, that investing in their own app is a good way to do it for the bigger agencies that have the resources to really make it happen. So, thanks very much.
Colin, thank you very much. Appreciate having you here today and your expertise and all this great information we're learning from the Sandbox and other pilots. It's really helpful to us, so thank you very much. Now we're going to move into a section of the program where we have some local projects panel. So we will be hearing from 3 people that are actually working on local projects right now in real time. They're joining me up on stage. This is Nicholas Williams, Deputy Chief of Staff of Public Works with City and County of Denver, James Rosner, Associate Vice Chancellor, University of Denver, and Heather McKillop, Chief Financial Officer and Assistant General Manager of Finance and Administration for RTD. So we're just gonna move through some questions with the panelists, and we'll begin with just kind of a general question for each of you. So the first question is if each one of you could just provide a brief description of your project and what you've learned this far. So why don't we go ahead and start with Nicholas?
Thank you very much. Thank you for having me. Are we on? I'm gonna start. I'll try to project here while we wait for the microphone. So you guys are all going to be pretty familiar with this. Here today to talk about our dockless vehicle pilot permit program. In May of this year, a few hundred scooters showed up on our streets from 2 operators initially. Let's say they were uninvited at that point. Uninvited, I think is one way to put it. We went through kind of an enforcement action, had the scooters removed from the right-of-way, and then quickly went to develop a pilot program to allow these operators back onto the right-of-way in a somewhat controlled manner at this point. For the sake of our program, we define dockless vehicles as vehicles utilizing onboard technology that allows a user to check out a vehicle remotely throughout the day from the public right-of-way. And that last part is kind of the key in how we've been involved in this. The first permanent vehicles arrived at the very end of July. These were 2 scooter operators. They've since been joined by Lyft, who's just joined in the last couple of weeks. We're also, a few weeks ago, our e-bike, dockless e-bike Jump, these are the red bikes you've seen around, locked to various different things, joined. We'll have a few more operators on both sides starting in the next few weeks, I'd say, and this program will run through the end of next July. At that point, not at that point, currently we're working with different agencies to see how do we want these on a permanent basis, if we want them on a permanent basis on a right-of-way. And working with them, last presentation was very interesting. I'm not a technical person, but our technical teams have been working with the different operators to make sure that we are collecting sufficient data and the quality of data that we need to make some informed decisions as this potentially becomes a permanent program.
All right. Thank you, Nicholas. James, same question, just a brief description of the project and what you've learned so far.
Good morning. We've had actually 2 initiatives at the University of Denver, and one of which was working very closely with the City and County of Denver over 8 months from about October to February of last year to be the pilot for Dockless Bike Share. We launched in May of this year arrival of scooters, and it was really for non-powered bicycles on campus. We launched 200 bicycles. We have 20 on-campus approved parking locations, and it's been a pretty exciting pilot. We have an immense amount of utilization. In the first couple weeks, we had over 3,000 rides on campus, and we had a unicorn bike, as we call it, that actually got 30 rides in one day from just those 200 bikes. So again, our goal was to launch with the student population before school ended in the spring, so that when the students arrived this fall, they wouldn't either bring their own bikes or buy a Walmart bike and abandon it, and then of course we have to deal with that. So students arrived back. Our first week of class was this week, so it's been a very exciting time. And then of course we've been working closely in terms of how our pilot responds to the new initiative as well. So we've been working collaboratively through a memorandum of agreement with the city to have our pilot be in place. Second to that, and what we kind of wanted to focus on was our Chariot microtransit shuttle for the campus. Several years ago, University of Denver tried to own and operate its own shuttle, and utilization was really low, and it was not very successful. And we're looking at starting a new shuttle service that could be a little bit more nimble and on demand. And so we went with Chariot, which is an app-based service, and it is a distinct circulator with a goal to connect to RTD's infrastructure. So we have a stop at the light rail station there at University Station, and we have 5 other stops across campus in a fixed route for 2 vehicles. So we actually launched that July 9th. During our actual very slow time of year to kind of work the kinks out before students arrive in the fall. We've had approximately 600 rides the first month, 850 rides the second month, with half of the pickup and drop-offs actually being at the light rail station. So that's been exciting. I actually use it at least once a week to take the light rail in from Highlands Ranch and then use the shuttle to come along. So it's really a complementary goal, and we've seen, of course, a giant spike in ridership with students arriving back, and so we're excited to see how it takes off from here.
Great, thank you. Heather, please tell us what you're up to.
So, is it on? Okay, good. So we're in the mobile ticketing realm and looking at how we can do a variety of different things to be able to integrate ticketing not only across transportation modes, but what are the other opportunities that are out there that might be available to us. So we're kind of taking 3 parallel paths right now. One is a lot of people talk about integrated ticketing and don't really know what that means. Integrated ticketing is really where you go to one app and you're able to purchase with $1 amount on one app your entire ride. So whether it's on a scooter or a bike or transit, whatever it might be, that's able to be purchased that way. There are a lot of complications with integrated ticketing, which I'll talk about a little bit later. But the other thing that we're looking at and working with some of the TNCs on is just having our ability to purchase an RTD ticket on a TNC app. So right now that's not necessarily integrated ticketing because it wouldn't be necessarily just one ticket that you would have, but you would be able to go into an app on one of the TNCs and see the options for buying a ticket on RTD, light rail, bus, or commuter rail. That's the second kind of parallel path that we're going. The third is we'd actually like to transfer to an account-based system using the mobile platform as the backbone for that. Right now we are in a card-based system. If you have the MyRide card, you know that it doesn't work quite like your Starbucks card. You just can't go load it and have it available right there online. You either have to go to an outlet or a King Soopers or Safeway to be able to have that balance available right away. It also doesn't deduct from your account right away because it's all based on when the card's used. So we're hoping to transfer over to an account-based system and hopefully a more cheaper methodology than some of our partner agencies have done, who have spent over $100 million on that process. We're hoping to do it for something in the $3 to $4 million range. But as usual, Monday's always a problem. So some things that we've learned as we're going through this process is there's a lot of interest for the private sector, and everybody has a solution for us. So it's really kind of hard to sort through all of the things that are coming your way and figure out what makes sense for your agency and how do you introduce that to the public. We have been very fortunate with our mobile ticketing app. It launched last November. We expected total revenue sales to be about 2.2% in just the first 8 months or 9 months or so. We're at 5.5% of our total revenue, and we only offer one product, which is a day pass. So we really have seen the growth of mobile ticketing and the really people asking for more and more things, and so we kind of think that's one of the directions we should be pursuing. The issue is it's not always as easy as it looks. Everybody says, you know, here, just do this and it'll be fine. And then you start looking into it and you get into some of the real nitty-gritty details that need to be worked out. So,
Did anybody catch where I think Heather said something about money always being tight? In her CFO role, that's always what she's telling us every day, but she does a good job watching it. Before the next question, I just want to let everybody know, as you've seen the slides, we'll be making the slides available to everyone. We'll be posting them to our website. We're also doing a video recording of this event today, too, that'll be available on our website, so you'll have those available in a variety of forms. So let's go into a second question, and let's start talking about the challenges you've specifically had. So what are your primary challenges in implementing your project? And at the end of the day, how will you define success? And why don't we start with you, Heather, and we'll work this way.
So I alluded to some of those. I think the big thing, Colin talked about several of them in his presentation. One of the big things we're running into is data sharing. We haven't really launched into how the private sector will be able to share with us, but I know they want a lot of information from us. And so the question is, as a public agency, how much do we provide and at what level, and how do we protect our customers and their privacy issues? So data sharing is definitely really high on the list of issues and challenges we're going to have to work through. I think one of the other thing is when you have an integrated system, who is the owner of that customer? So if I started out on a scooter and then I get on the rail and then I end up, taking an Uber or Lyft to my final destination, whose customer is that and at what time? Is there a handoff process, or is there one group that we all contract with that deals with the customer? So if they have an issue on the rail, do they call us, or do they call where they purchased their ticket, which might be from the scooter provider? So that's a really complicated issue. And then of course the money situation. If you have an integrated system, how do you actually share revenue? How do you determine who's going to get what portion of that revenue and when and how? And so those are really the questions that we're trying to grapple with now as we move into trying to see what an integrated ticketing system might look like.
Thank you. James, your challenges.
Well, challenges, it's an exciting time with our students. So in terms of a demographic, we have a very specific customer group, of course, with the campus. So we have a 2-year live-on requirement for our students on campus. But our undergraduates are about 5,000 undergraduates, but our primary group of students are our graduate students, about 6,500, which don't have a live-on requirement. So it's really interesting trying to balance the needs of the different groups on campus. In terms of the access for both pilots, both the Dockless Bike and the campus shuttle, it's restricted right now to those folks that have a @du.edu email address. So if a visitor to campus takes the light rail, they might not be able to use the bikes or the shuttle that's there, and it might affect their experience of arriving at University of Denver. And we did that purposefully because, one, we really didn't know how successful each program was going to be, and we needed data throughout this pilot to justify further expansion. And specifically on the campus shuttle, we only have 2 vehicles. One is a wheelchair accessible vehicle, and so the max in the full vehicle is about 12 seats. So understanding how it's used throughout the campus and the utilization is really key. And if we want to look at a base level of service, we could look and expand it, and our goal is to increase services other than just the fixed route for whether it's a safe ride home or a ski bus shuttle for students to go up. But if we try to solve and provide all those services at one time, it gets really complicated. So we kind of started simple with just the fixed route to get the data and the information on ridership before we really start expanding at all the possibilities. So that's really a challenge, is trying to manage expectations of whether it's a freshman student or a graduate student and how easy it is to get around. And those campus visitors that say, wait, the DU has a shuttle, how come I can't ride it? So it's really exciting there. But those are some of the main challenges of trying to meet a lot of needs, but providing a base level of service that's consistent and used a lot to then expand after that piece.
Thanks. You answered actually two questions that I had in my head. One was, is it a flex route or is it a fixed route? And I think you said fixed route. And then the other one was, is it available for visitors? So appreciate that you flushed those out for us, and we'll be really interested to learn what you're learning as you expand that. So thanks.
So we'll wait on successes here for a second, but
All
yeah,
right.
those are some of those challenges.
Good. And then Nicholas.
Sure. I think for us, kind of the biggest challenge has been trying to figure out what we don't know. Give my colleague Cindy Patton credit. She did see Dockless coming on the horizon, worked with DU, thinking that we can use this as our pilot program to figure out how does Dockless work, how does it interact in a controlled manner with what we've got going on already. And then kind of our timeline was sped up. We decided to make the jump to a citywide program. We'd like to think we worked faster than the speed of government to develop this pilot program, but because of that, I think the metaphor that's been used a few times is sometimes it feels like you're building a plane while you're flying it. So it's been a challenge to work with a number of different agencies, a number of different operators, all while trying to implement this program, all while receiving important feedback from the community on that, and make sure we are getting the information we need and regulating this program in a way that is safe and effective for the citizens of Denver. One of the most immediate concerns for us, though, has been state and city ordinance define the scooters as toy vehicles. And by defining them that way, it limits where they can legally be ridden. And so for right now, that means they're technically relegated to the sidewalk. And, you know, we all see the scooters. We all know that's not naturally where they want to go. The main comment we hear from the community, from the bicycle pedestrian advocacy community, is the speed at which these operate and just the manner at which they operate, it's more appropriate for the bike lane. And so we hear that, the operators agree. We're one of the very few cities in the entire country where this has been an issue, but we're working with our city attorneys, with city council, with DPD to make sure we can modify some ordinance, some regulation to get them off the sidewalk and onto the bike lane. But then the question becomes, if there is no bike lane, are they more appropriate on the sidewalk, or are they more appropriate on the road mixing with the cars? And these are kind of the sticky issues that we're having to work through as we go through this program. So it's, you know, learning all of this stuff on the fly, and this is why we wanted to do a pilot program, so we wouldn't be locked into any sort of rules as the industry evolved. We've already seen companies come and go. Aurora, the company that was serving Aurora for Dockless Bike Share, chose to exit. OFO, another company that participates with DU in that, they're starting to change how and where they want to be. So yeah, and kind of give us an opportunity to see, are we dealing with Betamax, or are we dealing with Netflix here on there? So it's been an interesting experience so far, and yeah, it's just trying to figure out what we don't know.
Well, you know, James, being downtown all the time where our offices are and living close to downtown, it's just the scooter thing has just been fascinating to watch. I'm glad you touched on some of the safety issues around where they can be, where they can't be. And you know, as I'm always driving and we're thinking about safety in our operations for our bus operators, we think a lot about bicycles because they do move fast and they can come from all kinds of different directions. And now we've added scooters into the mix, and it's going to be really interesting to see how all this flushes out. What about wintertime? Are the scooters going to get picked up when it snows? Or are they going to get studded tires?
Well, I think that's something we're very curious to see. Moved here from Texas in May, so heard about the
You're going to need some studded
there's
tires.
snow that comes to the ground and stays on the ground, from what I've heard. No, it'll be very interesting to see. We've heard, I think Bird has said they're looking at ways to ruggedize their scooters. I don't know what that means. These scooters, you can buy one on Amazon. Their volume is the key for all of these operators. So the types of customizations that we're going to see, will be very curious to see, and that'll kind of help us define, as we set ridership goals and we set fleet sizes, going through a winter here, I think will really guide what we do on a more permanent basis. So your guess is as good as mine at this point.
All right, it'll be interesting to watch. Let's go into another question specifically for Nicholas and James, and this is about your interaction with RTD. So what has been your interaction with RTD on your current projects, and what role do you foresee RTD playing in the future on these types of projects? And we'll go ahead and start with you, James.
Just briefly on the snow question, we baked that into our pilot, and so again, we have somewhat of a captive audience in a contained, controlled environment, which makes what we can do and the response rate in managing the contract easier than one that's operating citywide across the board. So from our side, we made it a very clear item that it couldn't interfere with our snow operations. We defined parking corrals and how they have to pick up bikes before events and deploy them after. So we did consider that in our pilot, but again, it's kind of easier to manage that on a contained campus. So I understand our paradigm is very specific. In terms of working with RTD, our goal was really to connect to transit for all, and we worked very closely both on getting approvals for those corrals that I mentioned, those approved bike corrals, and a shuttle stop on the RTD property at the light rail station. And so it took some coordination and again, several months of communication, and we were successful with working through some of the approvals needed to be allowed on that property, which has been a goal from the start. And that's the only non-DU property that the shuttle is on, and same thing with the bikes. So we were very purposeful to have our shuttle stops on DU private property and the other bike locations on property, but it's been extremely successful because the majority of, like I said, of pickup and drop-offs for both bikes and the shuttle are at the light rail station. So we're seeing, and again, that's a data piece. Data is very exciting about this pilot of what can be shared, what can't be shared, the ease of analysis of that, and again, trying to work whether we, of course, participate with the EcoPass, but trying to know where people are coming from to then access these options are good. And our goal is, of course, to reduce single occupancy riders on the road. We talked about congestion there with Uber and Lyft. So getting cars off the road, we're even debating not allowing those live-on students to bring cars to campus. And we're actually eliminating some parking lots through some of our projects and not building parking as a behavior change. And it's tough when tenured professors are used to parking right at their building, and then we're saying use the light rail and take a shuttle in. It's a bit of a challenge there, but it's exciting to have that ability to connect to existing infrastructure and enhance it and increase the ridership there versus driving a car. And we're starting to see that data again very early in each pilot, just a couple months in, and the behavior of the campus ebbs and flows by the quarter system. So it's exciting to see, and we're keeping a close eye on that information.
All right, thanks, James. Nicholas.
I think one unique aspect of our program nationally is that we've, from the start, connected it to transit. We have an existing transit amenities program that allows for pilot projects. And so this program falls under that transit amenities program. One of the requirements is that the vehicles, when they are staged in the morning, be staged near transit. The idea being you should be able to rely on where these vehicles are, and they should also start to integrate into the existing transportation system and provide that very popular first mile, last mile potential solution on that. So because of that, we've worked with RTD from the beginning and have found RTD to be an excellent partner as we go through this. You know, they have brought up a lot of concerns that we've tried to weave into our program. Certainly accessibility, making sure we're keeping the transit stations as clear as possible for those transit users. We've also been working hand in hand with them as they develop a license for their properties. Large number of transit stations throughout the city are on city right-of-way, but of course light rail and some other properties are property of RTD, and working with them to make sure our programs are complementing each other on that. And then just as this program moves forward, whether it stays a requirement that they're staged next to transit or not, the whole point of this, and I think the whole point of why we're here today is these types of mobility options need to integrate into the existing transportation system. We need the full menu of options for folks, and we see that. And so because of that, working with RTD is critical. And then as this expands, the very nature and the freedom of these dockless vehicles, folks that are riding don't get to the city line and say, oh, that's it, I know there's no existing pilot program over there, got to turn around. These are going to move into other cities. We've already started talking with other neighboring cities. And so I think working with regional agencies like RTD, like DRCOG, to make sure that as a region we grow this program together, I think is absolutely critical.
Thank you, James. Or I'm sorry, Nicholas. So Heather, how's RTD interfacing with other public entities on your part of your project, and how do you plan to involve other public entities on our next phases?
So we have started working with CDOT with their bus staying. That's kind of a normal progression since they also operate out of Denver Union Station. And so we began talks with them on the integrated ticketing part. We thought it might be easier on the integration to start with another public agency versus the private sector and see if we can work through those issues as partners in that. Our ultimate goal would be to expand that integration beyond public agencies, but what we'd like to see in the near term is really working with transit agencies across the state, so that there would be a vision that you could get on, let's say, a bus staying in Glenwood Springs and ride that all the way into Denver Union Station, and then get on the light rail and go down to the southeast part of town or southwest part of town, or out to the airport even if you wanted to. So, and to the customer, that would be seamless. So you could purchase your ticket one place, one time, and be able to ride an entire system of transit and not have to rely on a vehicle to get around the state, which is going to be a very unique concept in this state. But I think it's doable with the amount of transit providers we have, and the fact that if we can work together, I think we'll get to a place that that will be seamless for our customers. And if we can do it from a public agency standpoint, we'll be able to work out some of the details that will become and hopefully less problematic as we work with the private sector and how we offer those services in a kind of one app environment.
Yeah. You know, interesting, I've also been engaged in some dialogue about talking about like a statewide thing, but then there's people that are like, why can't we do like a national thing? Like if I'm riding a transit system in Denver, if there could be one app, and if I go to Seattle or Utah or Salt Lake or LA, you know, could it be the same app? And you know, there's just so much, I think, disparity between all of our structures and fares and everything, but that's also an interesting thing. I know one thing I'm interested in is putting together maybe a user group so our mobile ticketing provider is Masabi, right? Is maybe putting together a user group of all the different transit agencies that use Masabi and seeing, you know, are there any opportunities for doing something like that would be interesting, but that's even a bigger stretch than the state
Well, when
piece.
we saw the demo from the people in Germany, my exciting part was they were able to buy their coffee in between. So with their mobile app, for one ticket, they were able to ride to one place, get off, buy their coffee, and get on another mode of transportation. So I was pretty excited about the coffee piece. So we might be having to work with that. We might have to work out that one sooner rather than later. But.
Yeah, they had some great slides that like, well, and now I'm here I am at the end of my trip with a sandwich and a coffee, and all done with one tap. So very good. Okay, well now we want to hear what kinds of questions you have for the panelists. So hopefully you're still logged into Slido, and let's see what kinds of questions we already have coming up. So it looks like we already have a few, and what I'm going to ask my team are these that are popping up now for this panel, Bill? Okay, good. Well, let's jump into this first one and see, how does a public agency become a disruptor when it is part of the status quo? Wow. Anybody brave enough to take that one on? Okay, go ahead.
I think the key for public agencies is you can no longer just be, I mean, public works is, street paving is critical for obviously what we do, but it's not the only thing that we do. We've recently undergone a reorganization with an attempt to kind of streamline the project delivery process on that. And a big key of that is the ability to be more nimble, more proactive, and less reactive on that. We're looking to hire folks specifically for mobility innovation, things like that, so that we can continue to be forward-looking, forward-thinking on things like this, so that when they show up at our door with 500, whatever the next thing's taxi drones are, it's not going to be taxi drones. We're ready. We've got structures in place. We've got ordinance regulation in place that can allow these to be operated and implemented in a responsible manner that works for the citizens and provides a new and innovative service for them. So I think that's probably as disruptive as we're going to get.
Other thoughts from panelists?
Well, I think you alluded to it. It's being much more flexible, which is really not easy for us to do as public agencies because of the amount of public input that we're used to getting and the amount of collaboration that we're used to doing. And we still need to do all those things, but I think it's really important that we try to stay ahead of that. As I said, there's lots of people that are coming to with lots of ideas, and we need to be able to figure out how internally to react better to that, because what I'm doing with mobile ticketing and all these other providers impacts our planning department, impacts our operations department, impacts everyone across the board. And so to be a lot more organized and nimble internally, I think is going to help be able to be ahead of it so that we're not always constantly reacting to what everybody's bringing forward.
Any thoughts, James?
From working with a public agency on trying a new idea, I think there was some great trust and collaboration that required communication and what's the goal that we were trying to achieve. So, of course, University of Denver is seen as almost any other private owner just with a campus that's trying to do something. And it affects the neighboring communities, it affects others, and it did take a leap of faith from the city side to allow a private entity to try something that's a disruptor. And again, we worked through a process together, and then the market and the industry launched something anyway that both groups had to respond to around that. So I think from a entity that's trying something new, it did take some time and a bit of patience, and of course, being not-for-profit, we're on a different timetable. A university, the mechanisms at DU turn a little faster than maybe a government agency, but it's slower than a for-profit entity that's trying to launch and make money right away. So we even felt pressure from some entities, but we had to make sure that we were a good partner in communicating to try to come up with a structure that could work for both parties in this arena.
Yeah, so speaking of being nimble, one thing that we talk about a lot on our team, and we dedicate an hour each week to just brainstorm, innovate. Nothing's off the table, where we just try to sit and discuss what is the future of transportation. But one of the things we talk about is sometimes we're our own worst enemy, and I call that being too smart for our own good. Like we start with, hey, let's do this, and then we get a group of people in the room, and it's all of a sudden, when we can add this on, and before you know it, we've taken something this big and turned it into something this huge. And so we need to work on that. Maybe we need to hire a chief disruptive officer. and see what we can do. Well, let's take on this next question. I think this is always and I touched on this a little bit in my opening remarks about the temptation for the next new thing. Let's jump on board on this. So technology can be distracting, but how do we stay focused on the less sexy, the less glamorous things, but important low-tech solutions like sidewalks to transit stops and dedicated bus lanes? You probably have some thoughts on that, Nicholas.
Sure, I do. As we've said, the staff in Public Works has said a number of times when dealing with the scooters, this wasn't on anybody's work plan for this year. It is a challenge because, yes, it is easy to get kind of knocked off your schedule. I think the benefit of working with a large organization with strong institutional knowledge like Denver Public Works is that we've got folks that will always be focused on sidewalks. For instance, we are helping implement a sidewalk repair program. So to see this and to go from one side talking about scooters and then go to another meeting where we talk about 150-year-old flagstone for the sidewalks here kind of gets to the dichotomy of what agency like Public Works works for. I think the key is having strong leadership with strong priorities, and a strong focus on serving the citizens because, yes, there are certain stereotypes about who rides scooters. I think some of that's fair, some of it's unfair on that, but we need to make sure that everyone from start to end has options to get around the city, and it's going to be more than just scooters. It's going to be sidewalks. It's going to be all sorts of accessibility options. So yeah, I think it's strong leadership and strong focus, mixed in with that nimbleness to be able to react to the next big shiny thing.
Other thoughts from panelists, or no? Should we? All right. Let's. What about interinstitutional connections that you found to be key in moving your project forward and needed for the, and what kinds of things are lacking?
So I'll start. I think one of the things that was mentioned earlier was trying to figure out what the common goal is. So what are you trying to achieve, and what is the other person trying to achieve, whether it's a private sector or the public sector that you're working with to try to enact some of these things and move them forward. And that's been key because we hear a lot of times that, what does Uber or Lyft want from us? Why should we be doing this? Because they just want to take away our customers. And so I think that may have been the case at first, but I think in our conversations lately with them, their attitude is changing a little bit, and they are realizing that they're going to have to work with the existing providers to make the transportation system better for everybody. So I think one of the benefits of having this group together is that we form those connections so we can work with fellow agencies to make sure we're not stepping on each other's toes, that we're not doing something that might counter somebody else's efforts out there. And so I think one of the things that is lacking potentially right now is just finding out what other people are doing, because there's so much going on out there in the Denver metro community right now, and how do we make sure we coordinate those instead of working at odds with each other?
Yeah, good point, Heather. Other comments, or we can move on to the next question. How do parking minimums in RTD's park and ride-based system fit in with all these new mobility options? Any thoughts from the panelists?
I'll start out. Public Works is really moving to more of a curbside management, looking at the curbside holistically and what is the highest and best use. Is it parking spots? Is it corrals for dockless mobility vehicles? What is the best use going forward? We can't just build as many parking spots so everyone can have one parking spot when they come downtown, and that's not what people desire. We run into space constraints, usage constraints on that, so we're really trying to take a holistic look at curbside management, curbside policy as we move forward and start to develop different road plans, curbside plans, things like that. So yeah, it's no longer, the curbside's not just a place for people to parallel park anymore.
Well, and I was just at a project we're working on now with the City and County of Denver with a developer. We got an unsolicited proposal on, is to have there's a low kind of low-income,
Affordable housing.
affordable housing development that's going on at the Sheridan Station, and they've asked to use some of our parking spaces on our garage for that. And at first, we had a lot of resistance. We had a lot of issues with the funding mechanism and those type of things. And there was a requirement by Denver to have minimum parking. And I think one of the things that we were able to work through in conversations of what can we do and what can Denver do and then what can the developer do is really to focus on ultimately, if you're building some residence around a station, do you really need to require all those minimum parking requirements? Because hopefully they'll be riding transit. So Denver actually, I don't know if it was a formal waiver or what, but they lowered for that particular unit their parking requirements that allowed us to be able to meet the requirement that was now needed by the developer and to work through those processes. So I think really working in partnership on some of those things, again, going back to finding out what is the real need and how can we modify some of those things. So I think it really does make you think differently about some of the requirements that we all have in our policies and procedures, and do they need to be evolving to consider all these new mobility options that might be out there.
And through our coordination with city planning, of course, DU is looked at as a single zone lot, and so a lot of the parking count is all combined versus each building or residence hall together. And I mentioned before, for these new buildings we're constructing, we're not adding any new parking, but we're trying to connect with the dockless bike and the shuttle to move parking to our periphery. And again, that behavior shift is interesting, to have it a more rideable and pedestrian-friendly campus. And an interesting coordination piece or concern was, because there is not free parking on campus, it's either pay or meter or permit, that someone might come and just park at the RTD stop and then use it as free parking to then access the campus and get on the shuttle in there. And we haven't really seen that be a concern. It's more in enhancing and encouraging people to use light rail instead of driving to then park at the parking garage and then come in. So we're really hoping to work with all the balancing in the network on how we can connect to and be a part of all the different, again, options and solutions for our constituents.
Yeah. Let's take a look at this next question. It takes us into a little bit of a different conversation. If RTD commits financial resources to TNC integration, how do we ensure equitable implementation throughout the entire region, for example, the North? Heather, you want to? I know it's too hard for me.
That's a loaded question.
I'm going to bounce it to Heather.
Well, I think first we have to see what those resources look like and how that integration will work, and what works best to bring people forward to one of our transit centers where they can be able to either access the bus or access the light rail system. Or in the case coming shortly to the north, hopefully, is the commuter rail. So I really think that it is going to be a discussion not only about equity, but, and we talked about equity not only from a regional standpoint, but from an ADA standpoint, and how do we deal with those issues, things that we're required as an agency that receives federal funds to deal with, but may not be what the TNC is necessarily interested in. They're going to look at where they make money and where it makes sense for them because they have a different business model than what we have as a governmental agency. So I think I don't have a good answer for that yet, but I think we're going to have to continue to work through those issues because I'm going to think we're not only going to see it in regional equity, but we're going to see it in other aspects that we're going to have to deal with, and again, because they have a very different business model than we have, and they may not want to go where we want them to go. So.
Thanks. Let's move to this next question. How important is it for public sector agencies to collaborate in advance of entering into partnerships with private mobility providers?
I'll take this. As I've said before, I think it's absolutely critical. From the beginning, we've really relied on our existing relationships with RTD to help us develop this program. And we've had to deal with or collaborate with a number of different intra-agencies within the city, and then external partners on that. The speed at which these things occur requires a existing framework, existing relationships, It's kind of why we went with the pilot program where we implement the program. Now we're working with different organizations to get input on how it's working on that. So I think it's absolutely critical for different public agencies and making sure you have strong connections to the different advocacy and interest groups in the city. The bicycle and pedestrian advocacy groups in the city, the Denver Streets Partnership, has been great in helping us provide input and providing feedback on how they think the program is going. So I think the key to this and the key to being nimble and proactive on this is leveraging all of these existing relationships and all the existing expertise in this region.
Thank you. Let's take a look at this, this next question more about, it just kind of moved around a little bit on me. I want to talk more about the curb space, and you brought that up earlier, Nicholas, and I think a great example is you just got to go around the front of Union Station and check out all the challenges of all the different modes and all the different things, pedestrians, all this stuff that's converging right there on Wynkoop Street. So what about valuing those assets of the curb space, and how do we leverage them to encourage new forms of mobility?
Yeah, I think that's critical. And I think the key is kind of taking a step back and looking at the curb space beyond parking. As folks move here, as demographics change, as folks come in with different expectations on mobility and how they get around, parking is not always the highest and best use for the curbside. And so I think the key is giving public agencies, and Public Works is really trying to give the latitude to think beyond parking automobiles and into different mobility options like that, and being able to kind of analyze your policies and say, if this policy maybe you've worked previously, is this going forward what we think the best use of one of the city's most valuable assets is the right-of-way. One of the citizens' most valuable assets is the right-of-way. And so it's critical to look at that beyond parking more holistically as an asset and as a vehicle for improved mobility.
Any other thoughts in that area, the panelists? No? Okay. We kind of talked about the nimbleness of, that we need to stay nimble. I'll kind of skip that question. Let's go to how can RTD use technology to improve bus service and make it compete more effectively with TNCs. Any thoughts, anybody? Heather?
Well, I was always impressed the first day I came. I think I had a tour of one of our buses, and I'm like, a tour of a bus? What does that look like? But it was amazing to me that a bus is basically a computer on wheels. So right now, we can keep track of it. We can see where it's going. We can send messages. We can monitor activity, those type of things. So we use a lot of technology on our buses now, and it can always be improved. I guess we say have it compete more effectively. I guess I'm looking at it from a standpoint of we're not necessarily in competition, but we need to figure out how to work together. We need to figure out what we do best, and the TNCs need to figure out what they do best, and somehow they should be able to complement each other. Yes, we probably will lose some ridership to TNCs, but we also may gain some by the use of TNCs, who takes somebody to a Denver Union Station where they can catch any form of other transportation that's available out there. So I think we'll see technology improve to the buses. We are actually seeing technology improvements to our scheduling system now, which will help us better schedule and better adapt to changes in service levels and those type of things. But I'm looking at more not from a competition standpoint, but I think we've talked a lot about it being complementing our service. Mm-hmm. How do we do what we do best and have them do what they do best, and how can we merge those things together to make it as seamless as possible for our customers?
Yeah, and I think that applies to not just the TNCs, but all the other different mobility alternatives that are out there. Is that how do we work together? It's one of the big reasons for us wanting to have this strategic dialogue on a regional basis. Is how do we put all these pieces together in the most efficient, effective manner that provides solutions and not contributes to the problem. So I think there's a lot of opportunity there, and we certainly look forward to advancing that. Let's take one last question. The majority of the public wants to drive their own vehicles. How do you convince them of the importance of public transportation? And I would add on to that by not just public transportation, but other kinds of mobility modes that are available. What do y'all think?
I guess I haven't talked for a while, so I'll start with this one. So again, we're really looking to provide a diverse option in a menu for a lot of the campus constituents. And it's anywhere from our first year students to someone that's arriving to campus to go to a hockey game or an event at the Performing Arts Center, and everyone in between that full spectrum. And so everyone would like something that's convenient, that's predictable, and again, with access to transit, that's something that it is predictable. You have the light rail schedule, you have the bus schedule, and you can, how do we then connect and make options that make those schedules convenient to their activity that's on the campus? And again, we're from a private entity, we're looking at how can we augment and make it convenient and for our constituents. One thing I didn't mention is DU is funding the Chariot Shuttle loop, so it's free to folks at du.edu address, but DU didn't put any money towards the dockless bike, so it's the ridership that is paying for that service. And as we're looking to expand, especially the options for the shuttle to make it not just fixed route but specific uses, how does ridership then pay for that so DU doesn't constantly have to fund that? And that handover and transition will be interesting through this pilot period to go from 2 to 4 to on-demand to more locations that our folks are looking to go. So we're really trying to provide options to then shift the behavior change and have them be predictable and successful through this period. And we're using these pilot projects to get the data to then inform our future efforts. Again, we'd like to expand and not have it limited to @du.edu. We'd like to be able to make it accessible so it's convenient to others, and we're working closely through this pilot period to look at opening it up. Also, the number of bikes is 200. We're getting information to know what's the right amount of either shuttles or bikes that are needed to have it be successful holistically and over the long term. And so that's something that we're always keeping in mind.
And I'll just echo that. I think the key is having options and having it be convenient. As I mentioned, I moved here from Houston a few months ago. Houston, some of the stereotypes are true. The roads are very wide, the speeds are very high. But moving here and moving to an area that is served by transit conveniently, it's been a no-brainer for me. I even sold my car and take the bus and the train every day. And I think the key to that is convenience, accessibility, and options. And so that's why we're looking with the scooters, and that's why we tried to connect them to transit, is, well, maybe for some folks, it's a half mile, just a half mile too far to get to that bus. That's the only barrier that's keeping them from taking the bus in, and maybe not incurring $100 and something bucks a month for parking on that. So if these scooters can give that little boost, that little incentive for folks to try transit, to see that transit's great, that you arrive work refreshed, relaxed, ready to go, instead of frazzled. I think it's incumbent upon cities, transit agencies, everyone to do whatever we can to provide those options, to provide that accessibility.
Well, and I would say, I'll just chime in from a financial standpoint. I think one of the things, you can go to our website and look at is what it costs you to drive versus it costs you to take transit. Because, as we're going through our process now of our fare study, I get a lot of saying, well, this is pretty expensive. It matches the price of parking downtown. But that's just the price of parking. And if you look at all of the other things, the wear and tear, the gas that you put on, I mean, the more money I have for coffee now that I don't have to put all the gas in my car, and all the things that you can do because it's expensive to own and drive a vehicle, things that you don't think about, the insurance, the gas, the mileage, the repairs. And so we do have the availability of kind of doing that calculation on our website, which is the things that people forget about from a financial standpoint when they're looking at it. And then I would echo all the things about convenience and seamlessness. How do you get them out of the car? Because once you're in your car driving to the light rail station, there's a little temptation there just to keep going. So what is the motivation to get out of your car and get on that rail or get to that bus stop and move forward? And I think how do you make it seamless and convenient really are all the things we've been talking about here, is how do we improve that experience for the customer. So it's first nature to use public transportation, not your car.
And when you save money, you can use that Dutchbon app and get your sandwich and coffee at the end of your ride.
Absolutely.
All right, well, we're going to move into our next piece in a minute, but I'd like for all of you to join me in thanking the panelists. Great dialogue. Thanks for your projects. Thanks for what you're doing for mobility. So before the panelists leave, I'll introduce our next session. We're going to go into some breakout sessions now and give all of you an opportunity to discuss with your colleagues and your peers what things you see as important. And so we want your input on how RTD can best serve you and your community and how we can transition to this role of mobility integrator. We have 4 designated facilitators. Will you please just raise your hand and identify? There's 2, and Stuart, and where's the 4? Oh, back here at the table. Okay. They'll kind of move into different locations in the room. You can see some flip charts. You can kind of migrate towards those areas. We're going to spend about 30 minutes or so in these breakout groups, and then your facilitators are going to kind of take 3 to 5 minutes to present out what you all are talking about in terms of a summary. This is probably a good time for a bio break. I'm going to take one, so probably everybody might want to take advantage of that as you move into your groups. So thanks again. We'll continue on. Okay, thanks everyone for participating in the breakouts. I'm sure we're all eager to hear what all of our colleagues have to say. So let's please take our seats, and then we'll hear from our facilitators. All right, we're going to group number 1. Thank you.
Okay.
Please introduce yourself.
Sure. Hi, I'm Celeste Davis-Stragan. I'm the Regional TDM Program Marketing Manager for DRCOG, and I've been granted the ability to be on the Mobility Working Group to help put this together, and had a fantastic group of participants. So group 1, I'm just going to say I think we're the best. Our most important factors for transition from RTD to a mobility integrator, we prioritized our most important of the important and decided that first and foremost it was focus on the why RTD should be this and what does that really mean. Focus on the user experience. And we decided once we developed those 2 items a little bit more, then that would lead into the rest. Does that sound good, group? Okay. What challenges do we see them facing in transitioning to a mobility integrator? First and foremost, Betsy was pretty serious about this one, was recognizing the competition with cars and responding to it. Recognizing that RTD will be in competition with cars, and how do we negotiate that space to make them a successful mobility integrator, and also focus on more than that first last mile, as many of the different RTD service level areas have more than 1 mile to traverse to get to that first area, as well as funding to make it on par with highway investments. Currently, we know that's not the case. So those are challenges we identified. What does success look like? It would be jurisdictional cooperation between all the different modes. So if you are using a mobility device, that you don't just cross some imaginary line and have to put that device away. That we would have coordination also with local land use decision makers, so there's increased walkability and increased access, as well as, we'll lead into that, access to all bus stops, filling in sidewalk gaps, making it equitable and accessible to folks of all age ranges and capabilities, as well as more alternatives around. So really small things. You can just solve that tomorrow and we'll be all happy.
All right, thanks. Really great input. Appreciate that. Thank you very much, Group 1. Group 2.
Great. We're number 2. We're the great group 2. So I'm Stuart Anderson. I'm with Transportation Solutions in the Cherry Creek Area Business Alliance. I had the fortunate opportunity to lead this group, and Chessie was the scribe who did an excellent job. When we look at the answers that we have as our group, I'll characterize, at least under the first question, that our group really looked at it from the customer up. What does the customer want? And one of the first things was the customer wants to know what's out there. Many times, even if we live here, we don't know all the services that exist and in which area they operate. So just knowing what's out there. But then the second issue is about marketing and education. Do people understand it once they get there? What is that service? What is a dockless bike? Many people don't even understand that. So if you want them to connect with that as their first and last mile after they get off the train, are they educated to understand how it works? There needs to be a confidence about the core regional service. We need to have the trains running on time. We need to be able to have trains and lines going to all the areas. We need to complete this vision that we had that was out there of this regional rail system and transit system, because if we're focused on first and last mile, it's got to be first and last mile to the station. Sorry about that. He told me to do this and I forgot. Very good. There also is an issue about, as we look at a mobility integrator, are we ensuring that the social equity issues that relate to transportation, if they really apply here, and make sure that that happens? Some of the challenges that RTD may be facing moving forward is making those station areas appealing for people. Can they walk in that area? Some of the stations, it was pointed out, 40th in Colorado, is not really the easiest station to go to. So we need to think about that. We need to build trust between the transit company and the various other transportation providers that are out there. And also there needs to be a trust the other direction as well. That there needs to be a trust from those operators that RTD is working with them. We need an integrated system. That challenge of integration is probably one of the more challenging aspects. And then one comment was made about how that RTD is operating transportation. It's not a tech company. And so in many cases, we got to find that outside source of information to make sure, and that seems to be a barrier. What would be success in the future? There were some comments about being able to purchase your whole ride together off of your smartphone. So if you're arriving, I mean, even taking it to the level of a business traveler, when you buy your ticket, can you purchase a train ticket from the airport to downtown? And when you get to downtown, how are you going to get to that last leg to your hotel? Can you see these options? Can you purchase that as a package deal? So a very seamless system, again, focused on the consumer, certainly having a good sense about what things are going to cost and when you're going to get there, the reliability of a system. So we had a great group, and those are our comments.
Thank you, Stuart. Over to group 3.
All right. Hello there. I'm Daniel Hutton with the Denver South TMA. We had Group 3. Group 3 was fantastic. Thank you for the input. So, first question, what is most important for RTD to focus on going into this future? And it's kind of, Celeste made a good point, it's why and what were the big ones for us. And why gets back to the human-oriented, human-centered design of all this, making sure we put the people first. And especially, transitioning from transit to mobility, just the terminology, it's very human-centered. So we want to make sure to put folks first. And the next is kind of the what is definition of this all around, is not only definition for RTD internally, how this could affect the overall mission going into the future, core services, but also definition of and identification of all types of services, all of RTD's partners going into the future. What role does everyone play? It's kind of rebuilding an overall scope, or maybe not completely rebuilding, but revamping it, if we put it that way. Including kind of, talking about internal RTD operations, make sure there's flexibility there going into the future. It's really important in making sure RTD holds up its end of the deal as this mobility integrator, but still providing transit service. Maybe that's like a split scope. And then, of course, we discussed integration and making sure to take our time and bringing it all together. So, next question. What was that one? What are the biggest challenges to RTD becoming a mobility integrator? So, Quite a few challenges. One of them we discussed was kind of technical integration. So this is more back-end stuff. How all these folks, once we do this inventory, understand public sector partners, private sector partners, how does that look on the back end? And, what does that look like for data governance? I think it's been a challenge for, or the group did anyway, as do I, a challenge for the metro region as a whole. As we get into these technological systems, making sure that they are capable of being interoperable. And on the other side of that, so you got the back end, the technical side, and then you have that kind of the user interface, the user experience. Just because you can feasibly build something technical doesn't mean that people are going to use it or it would be simple or intuitive. So making sure that we focus on the intuition, which hasn't necessarily, I think that has been a challenge for us in the past. I think that touches on the main ones to add to others. And then finally, what does success look like? Someone in our group kind of put it simply, I think overall, is making sure it's affordable, reliable, and time efficient. But that also includes making sure it's universal. We make sure it's equitable and accessible, hugely important. And then, mode shares. I mean, that gets back to everything we've already been doing is hopefully seeing a decrease in single occupancy use and an increase in multimodal mode share. And also just kind of economic success for the region as a whole, how this plays into that. At the end of the day, there are much bigger implications. And then be bold. I kind of like that one. I mean, define it as you will, but getting out there, making sure people know that it's a new age, a new era. So I think it's summarized pretty well. Okay, excellent. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Great stuff. On to group 4.
Thank you. Hello. My name is Sarah Grant. I work for the City and County of Broomfield. I am a transportation manager, and I facilitated Group 4, also a fantastic group. So the first question about the importance of what is the important things that RTD needs to focus on. Our group felt it was really important that we still focus on those fixed routes and those feeder routes and not just let the TNCs kind of take over getting people to the core routes, that we still make sure that there's equity in our system for that. And promoting strategic partnerships while still being mindful of the new technology trends that are out there. But really a strong message of not just throwing out that fixed route, and that we need to still find ways to be sure that there is equity across the system for all ages, incomes, and abilities. So if we are looking to other partnerships, making sure that those people still have access to the system. What are the biggest challenges for RTD to becoming a mobility integrator? We had a lot of discussion around this one. And so some of the key points, we're talking about educating transit users on the benefits of becoming a mobility integrator, and what are we doing in communicating that to the public. Another challenge was fiscal sustainability of RTD. Our group felt very strongly that, that as we move in this transition, that we're still supporting RTD and that we're supporting all of the services that are out there and creating productive relationships across the RTD district amongst jurisdictions as we move along this process. And to be mindful that also another challenge as we move into this is a changing demographics and and that we need to continue to appeal and provide access across generations. Even more so than ever before, there's a growing divide in how we communicate from the millennials to what we've been talking a lot about, the silver tsunami. And one of our participants mentioned that there's a lot of talk about seniors right now, but we shouldn't forget about the millennials, that they are also a ginormous generation out there, and that we need to be looking to be speaking across these generations as we move into this new technology and how do we provide access. Another challenge was that affordable housing in the metro region is pushing people further out from the places that they need to be. So really, again, coming back to that equity in providing access becomes even more challenging as those with lower incomes may be pushed to places that have less access to transit. So how do we provide for that? And a big thing that actually started out with is that the private sector has competing interests. They have competing interests from what RTD currently has, what we have as public entities and serving the public. And so how do we make sure that we're still serving all people while trying to bring in these new private partners that may not necessarily have the same goals, and we need to be mindful of that. And that we need to be careful that we're still serving RTD's goals and that our funds are maybe not necessarily taking away from providing access for everybody. And last, what does success look like for RTD and the Denver region as a mobility integrator? Key points was that everybody has safe, affordable, accessible, and they have mobility options to get around the Denver metro region, reducing congestion, improving air quality, and not losing sight of these things as TNCs may become a more option that people are attracted to, but still making sure we're keeping those key goals in mind. We want to be sure that people are more aware of all the options that they have, including getting to the transit stops. Again, financial stability of RTD came up as another success of what success looks like, and ultimately increasing ridership of public transportation, and that at the end of the day, we're not decreasing ridership, and that it's no longer a stigma to use public transportation. And last, I thought this was a really cool thing, that we actually have pride in our RTD system, and that the people using it are really proud that we have a fantastic system, and we continue to invest in it and to grow. Thank you.
Wow. Well, thank you so much. That was an incredible amount of information, and we're going to capture all of it rather than, I think there was a few common themes that you probably heard around equity, accessibility, affordability. You know, some of the things that maybe we introduced at the very beginning in that question slide about what are the challenges and the barriers and things like that. So I know we've got the information. A question I have for the RTD team is, I know we're going to capture this and use this, but is there a way that we can capture that and put it out to the people that attended today, either through, I'm getting the nod, yes, so either through your emails or on the website? Because, you know, one of the reasons that we did this today was to engage all of you. I mean, we want to have you engaged, we need you engaged, and this input is hugely valuable to us as we move ahead. So thank you for that. So, okay, I promise we are gonna wrap up early. We have 3 Slidos, because I know you're dying to do more Slido. And then I just have 2 slides. So, Adrian, can you boot up the next Slido? And then, what future mobility outcomes matter most for the Denver region? And if you can pick your top 3. And we're waiting on Slido to come up. I'll tell you what they are. Pick your top 3. Affordability, equitable access, minimize congestion, sustainable land use, integrated mobility, protecting the environment. So you can think about those. I see the tech team back there working feverishly. Do you have it on your phones? Oh, okay, so you're answering. Okay, it's just not showing up on the screen yet. Well, that's good. This is the first time we've used Slido, by the way. I'm grateful to the team that they figured it all out, and it's a great way to get information. Oh, it almost came up. I see Adrian coming up. Oh, here we go. All right, so the top 3, affordability, equitable access, integrated mobility, minimize congestion. So a lot of the common themes we've heard about, talked about in the breakouts. So let's queue up the next one then. And this is more about what key areas should RTD focus on in the future. It's just fun to watch that thing move around to me. So it looks like optimizing bus and rail service has taken the lead, partnerships, new technology, all good stuff. All right. And then we've got an open-ended question, so this is of interest too, so we can just hear from you. What kind of RTD services will benefit your community? Looks like bus is carrying the day here. Expanding to bus, transit, reliable. Oh. Accessible coming up, services. I think we're, oh, well, rail's starting to pick up some steam. All right, well, thank you. We're going to just cover quickly in a wrap just a couple more slides, and some of this we've talked about. You know, RTD uniquely positioned to lead this regional mobility strategy. We operate all the modes in the Denver area now, including the microtransit, which we had quite a bit of conversation around. Early next year, we will be awarding a contract to do comprehensive system analysis and system optimization, which is going to have a much more glamorous name soon. And collaboration and implementing on pilots. We got a lot of things going on. We're on the verge of some announcements shortly, and then working on some other things through the plan. It's an ambitious 2-year plan. We're going to be looking at everything. We're even going to, maybe look at, is our boundary the right boundary? Should it be a little bit different? Everything's going to be on the table as we go through the comprehensive operational analysis. It's going to have a high invitation for stakeholders, high engagement, because we want everybody's participation and input and work along the way. And so that concludes today, and I just am really grateful that you chose to come and spend a half a day with us. It's really important. It's really important to us at RTD. So thanks very much, and stay tuned as we continue the transportation transformation.